in your own time.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I can't but help picking up from where you left off, Suhail, because I just was musing about the broader applicability of your model. So it might work within the specificities of, let's say, business studies, or even the ambit of the class or the tutorial that you proceeded to deliver your tutorial in. I'm just thinking of the arts and humanities or the social sciences, and how teaching methods could kind of segue or dovetail into a broader disciplines, and how we could devise more efficacious or means to gain better learning outcomes. Right. Firstly, I know that's on there, but I'm just going to talk a bit about the tutorials that I've been delivering over the last few weeks. It's in relation to a module called Societies and Institutions in Contemporary Europe. So I'm supervising 14 undergrad students, and the topic that they are dealing with is education and society. So there are 3 core tutorials to supplement the lectures that are delivered in this module. Now, I need to revert back to last year when I supervised one of the modules, which was media and society. And one of the things that emerged specifically from the evaluation of the essays, 3,000-word essays, which were a part of the project, was that the students seemed to have the essays lacked critical, independent thought, the ability to engage with their essay topics and amalgamate theory and practice, so whatever they've gleaned from theory, and have a broader real-world focus, seemed to be considerably less in their essays. Now, we got together, all the people that deliver the tutorials, members of staff, and I'm one of the PhD students that assists on this model, and we thought we really need to address this. So instead of the 2 tutorials that we had last year, we decided on adding another. So we have 3 core tutorials. The first one dealing with theoretical frameworks, the second dealing with interview fieldwork. So conducting interviews was a mandatory or compulsory methodology that the students needed to employ whilst collecting their data. And the third was more or less a summation of their work and any questions they might have about how their work is progressing so far. So at the outset, I tried to apply the leads 1 and 2 methods, which is addressing the aims and outcomes, stating the aims and outcomes at the outset, mentioning what I was going to do in the tutorial hour, and the possible learning outcomes, and then proceed with the actual tutorial. One of the areas that the students were extremely apprehensive about was going into the field and conducting these interviews. Firstly, gaining access to people. How would they go about, gaining access to sometimes high-profile individuals like Scottish MSPs, and then how would they, when confronted by a face-to-face interview situation, how would they start? What was there any structure to these interviews? Some of them are second-year undergrads, so they have never done an interview in the real world, so they were really apprehensive and trepidatious about this. Right. So in addition to the tutorials, I also did supervisory meetings. So I had built rapport with the students whilst doing these face-to-face meetings, and also through email feedback, guiding them through the process. So in that sense, all of this resonates with teaching or supporting learning, which is part of the UK PSF areas of activity. Assessing and giving feedback to learners, obviously it also resonates with email feedback and supervisory meetings. So The assessment of the SICE project is evaluating 3,000 word essays, as I've just said, and formative. So whilst providing them with email feedback on the various milestones and stages of their, in the trajectory of their projects, they do receive email feedback, right, you're on the right track, your topic's not really viable, it's too broad, you need to narrow it down, so on and so forth. And summative feedback right at the end, which is the big project, and the grand finale, which is a 3,000 word essay. Right, I tried to identify the reasons for change before actually going in and bringing about this change. So firstly, identifying learner needs. What were the immediate needs? The obvious immediate need was their project. They were concerned with getting a good grade because it is a fairly important project in their career, not career, but in their studies in the course of their learning. SICE project essay assignment, so that was the immediate need. I wanted to focus on that. Varying levels of learner assimilation. Now there were people in the class, as I say, who had never done an interview before, so how does one literally stylize your teaching in order to be, you know, approach the individual needs of each student? That was a huge consideration for me. So as I said, some students were intimidated by the prospect of fieldwork, others were unsatisfied with the lectures. Now this is hugely important because it's beyond your control. You can't really, if the lectures is in the past and the tutorials is something to, let's say, supplement whatever has happened, to summarize and to provide, you know, additional useful tips, let's say. So some of them were dissatisfied with the lectures and they felt that it was a one-size-fits-all approach, which was too didactic or too pedagogical. The teacher stood there and talked down to the students, and there was no real scope for them to ask questions or to delve into subtler nuances of their topics. So they felt that theory was insufficient for real-world experience, again going back to that whole theory-praxis dichotomy. They felt that what was being taught in the tutorials with particular reference to how to conduct interviews was insufficient when somebody stands there and reads out, you must do this, you must do that, you must listen, you must be attentive, all of that. It's very easy to literally, you know, spout that out, but how do you then make them aware of what it really actually means to be face-to-face with somebody in a situation where you're trying to evince or glean information from them? Incorporate visual learning through film examples of interviews. So this is something I thought I drew upon from my past experience working in television with Channel 4 as a documentary researcher. So I thought, hang on a minute, if they're going to go there and do interviews, it'd be good for you to draw on your own prior experience. And I happen to have a few video examples of interviews. So I selected two interviews. One was an example of a moderately good interview which had a few drawbacks and I wouldn't say flaws, but areas for improvement. And the second was an interview conducted by myself. And to give you a general synopsis of what the interview was about, it was fairly challenging. It was an investigative interview where there was this person who was a doctor from Naples, and he was opposed to the building of a children's hospital wing because the money coming in for that was from the Camorra, or the Italian mafia. And my task as an interviewer was to probe and ask these probing questions so as to elicit the true reason for why he was opposed, which was because the mafia had killed his brother in the past. And it was for me to get that sound bite for him to say, yes, they killed my brother and that's why I'm opposed. So it was quite a challenging interview, and I thought this would be a good example to illustrate, you know, the pitfalls in whilst engaging with the interview process. So, as I say, I thought I'd use these two film examples. Why did I think the change was necessary? Circumventing a one-dimensional pedagogical approach. So stand and talk, so I talk down to you, I tell you what to do, I'm just droning on for an hour, and there is no interaction between the students and the facilitator. So introducing change that addresses pragmatic needs. Again, this goes back to the immediate needs. You focus on one specific area. The use of audio-visual interface. Now, It leads to, Ian Davidson talked about the three modes of learning. So he talked about auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learning. And that occurred to me, and I thought audiovisual learning is really important. It's also far more, it facilitates interaction. It makes people think. It catalyzes them to ask questions. And also it enables debate and discussion. So I thought of adopting the show and tell approach, which is you've got something like a video clip, and so you're illustrating by example, by an audio-visual example, what all the theory that has been espoused during the lectures. So after that, I thought I'd invite creative criticism. So I played them the two videos, and I said, I'd like you to identify the positives and negatives that you saw within these two interviews. What do you think were the grey areas, areas for improvement? What do you think was really well done? And funnily enough, there were 8 people out of the 14 that showed up for that particular tutorial. It got them talking. They were really animated, and for me that was really great, because they were talking about, no, this person could have done this better. And I was just really intrigued to see what they would do, whether they would come out of their shells when I played my own interview, and I said, I said, feel free to just rip it to shreds, and any form of criticism is fine. And they did. They said, right, one of them said, I think you could have been more polite, because you were just literally going for the jugular, and you were not really being sensitive to the doctor, because he probably was he was emotionally compromised while talking about the death of his brother and all of that, which was great, because it just showed that the ice was broken. This barrier between the teacher and students was being blurred. And for me, that's a great thing. It's a very important thing. Evaluate learning and receive feedback. Now, at the end of it, I just asked them, right, did you guys... one thing I totally forgot to mention was there was the opportunity to project on a larger screen the 2 film clips, but I chose, because it was a smaller environment, a room half this size. I was mindful of the built environment, and I said, all right, let me use my laptop instead. So it caused them to huddle close together, and we were just, they were looking focused on the laptop. And because of that, I don't know, maybe it was a psychological thing, but it just facilitated more animated debate. So I chose not to use the bigger screen. I chose to use my laptop, which I was carrying, because I was aware that it was going to be an audience of 8 to 10 people, and perhaps having the laptop there would cause them to focus all together on one little screen. I don't know, this is just something I tried out. So in terms of core knowledge, I've just literally reiterated what's on the UK PSF guidelines, but the subject material. So evidence-based videos, which was directly related to the interviews that they were going to carry out in the field. So I was lucky enough to have 2 video clips that were examples or paradigms for how you should or shouldn't conduct an interview. So again, evidence-based. How students learn within their subject and disciplinary areas, which again comes back to the arts and humanities. Now this subject is within the broader remit of languages and intercultural studies. So it calls for spontaneity sometimes, where you can't really plan based on a model or a flow chart, and it requires a degree of interaction, intuition, and spontaneity. So determine the best fit. And in this case, I chose a audio-visual, let's say. I didn't ask them to perform any kinesthetic activities for that particular tutorial. The use and value of appropriate learning technologies. So like I said, I used the laptop instead of the bigger screen, and I used film clips. Respect individual learners and diverse learning communities. Now, individual learners, I highlighted the differences. They were at various levels in terms of their experiences. Some of them had conducted interviews before. There were a couple of mature students, so they had literally done interviews. But I had to be cognizant or mindful of the varying levels of learning. Promote participation in higher education and equality of opportunities. In terms of promoting participation in that particular tutorial, I think using the laptop and using film clips and then asking people to talk about it was my mode or method to do elicit participation. Use evidence-informed approaches, again, directly related film clips, examples of interviews. What better tool does one have to illustrate theoretical concepts? Acknowledge the wider context in which higher education operates. So again, for me, the future of academia is interdisciplinary, not just interdisciplinary research, but also interdisciplinary teaching and learning. So it has to traverse across the boundaries of discipline. And I feel personally an audiovisual approach could be used greater in scope across, be it the positivist domain of science and mathematics, and also the social sciences and arts and humanities. So I did run into a bit of trouble in terms of getting feedback from the students, because I think they were a bit aware of the fact that their projects were going to be graded and they're going to be evaluated, and so I think they were not very comfortable with being critical, and that this was an obvious pitfall, obstacle, and I was aware of it, so I didn't want to press them or make it mandatory for them to give feedback, which is fine. I instead went and presented my findings and my evaluation to PhD colleagues, because I thought they'd be interested, and they had also been doing a few tutorials, so I thought I could gain some input from them. So the comments that I received was that this was a more practical, hands-on approach that went beyond the didactic theory approach of lectures, which was, I think, quite valid, because one of the core feedback that I received from the students was that they were dissatisfied with lectures because they were not interactive enough. So the comments were, again, from the PhD students, were that that interactive learning and engagement is better than only theory, which sounds fairly axiomatic or self-evident. Practical or visual learning is preferable. Again, how do you make your theory work in the real world? This is, for me, a strong consideration that needs to be employed a little further in teaching and learning. Suggestions for improvement included, perhaps I could have started off with a popular interview of popular example of an interview, especially with bearing in mind they were second-year undergraduates. So perhaps an informal interview in a chat show host situation, that kind of thing, to just set the mood for more incisive interviews to follow, let's say. Consider using PhD colleagues' audio transcripts of their own research interviews. So perhaps play a sound clip of somebody, a PhD colleague who's done a hardcore research interview, and that could have been one of the methods that I could have employed, perhaps. Illustrating that practice is better. So showing interviews is more useful than just talking about them. So I did this as well because this was one of the requisites. So I had to talk about, you need to be able to listen, you need to break the ice initially, ask probing questions, open-ended questions, close-ended questions. But it's always good to illustrate that by example. So whilst the film clips were played, I could then tell them, look, that is an example of an open-ended question. That's an example of a close-ended question. That's a sound bite, and so on and so forth. So perhaps, as somebody recommended, perhaps a staged interview with bad interview techniques may help. So this is one of the things I could have done, which was literally sit with another PhD students, write a script for a bad interview, and just see whether they identified all the elements to avoid whilst conducting an interview. So that is food for thought. My future action plan. Again, I would like to continue my use of the Ian Davidson's auditory, visual and kinesthetic learning template in future teaching endeavors. To use visual interfaces to facilitate, again, I think one could use visual learning and use it to great effect, because in Leads 2 we had a look at a TED talk, and I think that was really, for me, really useful. I wasn't aware of that particular TED talk. And the fact that Leeds 1 didn't really use, for me, audiovisual interfaces enough to facilitate learning was ameliorated in Leeds 2, where that helped me to a great extent. And also it helped, I think Ian Davidson's session in particular really helped me in the sense that he was talking about public speaking and illustrated it with this example of a speech in the TED series of talks. So to widen the scope of learning, amalgamate theory with practice. I'm chanting this like a mantra, but for me it's hugely important. Thanks. That's all I have to say. Any questions?
Thank you. I have questions, comments. What about anybody else?
I have a question regarding change. So, if I understand correct, so the things that you mentioned, you were not doing those before, or are you, not the reasons, so like use of audiovisual interface, adopting the show and tell approach. So should I understand you didn't use them before, or you had a different way of using them?
This is a good question because it was module specific. I have used audio visual film clips in the past because I also did a module for British film and British society and culture in film, and I had to use examples of films and talk about it. So, however, in this particular module, education and society, which is fairly dry, I hadn't used, there was no opportunity, it hadn't presented itself to use any video clips in the past. So for me, this was something new in that particular module, yes. So I hadn't done that last year. We just had one session for interviews and then just left them loose on the unsuspecting world, which I thought was unfair on the students because they weren't really, we hadn't provided them with the adequate skills to go out and do an effective interview. But I think this time around, it suddenly occurred to me that, hang on, you've got these examples of good and bad interviews, or good and fairly moderately good interviews. So I think, yeah, why not use it? That's the reason.
Did it make difference?
I think so. I think so. I think it did. In terms of the tentative feedback that I received from the students, because they weren't ready to go all out and provide me, with comprehensive feedback, but they did say that it was far better than the lectures. And I wasn't just looking for, approbation and saying you did a great job, you're better than the lectures. But they did say that having these video examples, and it's still an ongoing process. A couple of them got back to me just yesterday saying, thanks for the video clips because we have done our interviews and they really helped. So, in a sense, I was quite pleased with that, yeah.
Brilliant. So, loads of things that I could say. My academic background was in linguistics, so I did a lot of interviews and I've taught people how to do sociolinguistic interviews as well, so I'm kind of with you on this. The moment of what I think was complete teaching genius was to choose not to use the projection. So just a bit of I wanted to go into that a little bit more and tell me about the impact of it and think, so what was it that you think really made the difference with having them huddled around your screen rather than looking at the projection? What do you think actually, so I think it was a really good decision. What do you think was really good about it?
I remember one of the sessions we did with you, Helen, was about the built environment and being conscious of your surroundings. And I'll be honest, this was a spontaneous thing. I was carrying my laptop in the off chance that there might not be a projector. So I thought, right, if that happens, I'll be ready. But when I noticed that there were 8 students and they were sitting in disparate little groups, little pockets, they were spread out across the room. And I thought, what's a good way to bring them together and make them focus? Because focus for undergrads is always a problem. I don't want to make a generalization here, but it is. Sustaining their interest for an hour can be quite a challenge. So I thought, right, if you've got a laptop here and you say, gather around everyone, and they would be around and focusing on one, I think it's a psychological thing. It's when you've got a little screen, everybody's looking at that little screen. It's also, although both the interviews rather were about 7 minutes each, so it's not a sustained span of time for them to get distracted. So I thought focusing on that one little screen was one thing that brought about concentration. It also brought a sense of unity, if I can say that, in an abstract, tangential way. They were focusing as one collective body on one particular screen. And as soon as I stopped the video, it was almost like a spell was broken and the atmosphere dissipated, and then debate just started without me prompting it. And for me, it was the spontaneity that I brought into the class in terms of using my laptop, which was then transferred to the students. And I guess that helped in at least facilitating debate. And through those discussions, they started asking so many different questions that were relevant. So I gave them the space to then ask their questions, debate amongst themselves. I did not intervene till finally I said, right, okay, what can we then sum up? What have we learned from this? And they were able to then jot down points, bullet points literally, and not even jot them down, just literally say, express them and say, right, I learned that you don't not listen in an interview. You don't interrupt at the point when the speaker's speaking, and you might then lose valuable information, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think I'm just rambling on, but
that's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.